Our presenter tonight for a layout tour is Joe Fuss, and Pete Smith has been spending quite a bit of time with Joe and is going to introduce him.
Thank you, Russ. Well, Joe has been addicted to model railroading most of his life. He started with a Marx train set when he was about 5 years old, and has never been able to shake the habit since. He was formally educated as an aerospace mechanical engineer. Except for a few years spent working for the federal government, he has worked for himself as a consulting engineer and running several small businesses he calls adventures, finishing with Ragg to Riches, which closed, unfortunately, in February of this year. His first layout was an N-scale effort, but he quickly switched to HON3 when, in 1974, he was one of the founding members of the Chesapeake Bay and Western Model Railroad Club in Virginia. The club remains today as one of the largest east of the Mississippi. His first professional job was based in Montrose, Colorado, where he became captivated by the mountains and the Rio Grande Southern Railroad. Today, and for the last 43 years, he lives in a very remote part of Pennsylvania, where he met Lori, his wife and best friend for the last 39 years. He continues building his home and his layout and pursuing a ridiculous dream of someday having a good golf game. But I can assure you his game is better than he pretends it is. Joe, over to you.
Joe's muted still.
There we go. That was easier than I thought. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, and that looks good.
All right, thank you. All right, guys. I've got to wake up over here. It's getting a little later on the East Coast than it is. I wish I was on the West Coast with you folks, most of you anyway. But it's been a long day. I'm sitting up in Rochester, New York to get this thing to work. I drove up to Don Wierzeniak's house to use his internet because nothing else would work in Pennsylvania. That's kind of how backwards we are. But some of you are familiar with my layout. It's the old Rio Grande Southern again, yes, which I love and am addicted to. And the picture on the screen, the opening slide here, is probably the most popular one that people have seen. That's my trout lake. The lake is about 11 feet long and about 4 feet wide. And in the background is, that's actually a forced perspective HO mill or HO mine. But let's move on here. All right. Why the RGS and why so big? Well, as Pete mentioned, I started my first job in 1974 in Montrose, but prior to that, in 71, I made my first visit to Southwest Colorado and stayed with the local priest in Telluride, and he borrowed snowshoes for us, and we actually hiked into Vance Junction on snowshoes and Ames Tank and all that, and walked over the Ames Trestle, and you get pretty much addicted to the country. It's just beautiful country, and it's a fascinating railroad with great history. That got me going on it. And in 71, I never planned on being in Montrose, but my first job ended up being based in Montrose. And I was an engineer in the bottom of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison for about 6 years as we were building a large hydroelectric dam. But at the same time, I was young. I was 24 years old at the time, and did a lot of exploring of the San Juan Mountains and a lot of backpacking and all kinds of stuff down there. It's someplace that's very near and dear to me. 79 came along. I was eventually transferred to Pennsylvania, where I'm at now, and I began building a house for myself. Expected to stay there about 20 years. I'm still there, and I'm still building the house. It's a fairly large house. It was built for the railroad mostly. It's way out in the country, sits out a lot of acreage, beautiful view down the valley. But the main reason again was for the layout. The layout I began constructing. Now remember, I moved there around 79. I didn't begin building the railroad until about 94. The house took that long to get livable anyway. I'm going through some of the history here to show you how much time has been put into the layout. Actually, it began in '94. I was working as an engineer for myself. We finally decided to quit about '99. Tried to quit. 2004, we had to go back in and start making some money because we weren't making it on just my savings. So we started Rags to Riches, the kit company that most of you know. 2012 came along. Lori got sick with some cancer. She's fine now, but because of the cancer, we decided we're putting way too much into the Rags to Riches. It was a 10, 12-hour day, 7 days a week job, and it was just escalating. So we decided let's start enjoying life a little bit. That lasted a few years until basically COVID came along. We would turn out one kid a year maybe. But then COVID came along and people were asking for more and more and more again. So we were back at it almost as nearly as bad as we were back in 2012. So we decided in February of this year, that's it. We're going to close Rags and see if we can make it again on our savings. So far it's working, but it's only been a month and a half. But overall that time from actually starting construction of the house in '79 to now, I've spent maybe 12 years worth of time actually working on the layout. So that gives you an idea of what you're going to see and about how much time it takes to get that far. This is the footprint of my basement. It's built expressly for the layout. I designed the house, I designed the basement, about 1,500 square feet. There's only one stairway down, doors going both ways from there through a vestibule. We have 3 nooks. Utilities are along this wall, but that only consists of a pressure tank, generator, and things like that. The railroad actually goes over the top of that. The only other thing obstructing the basement would be the furnace. There's no laundry room, there's no water heaters, there's nothing else down there. So that's what I started with. It took me about a year to come up with the track plan when I finally got to it. And this is the general arrangement of the railroad in the basement. We start with Ridgeway is the main hub. It does interface with the Denver and Rio Grande coming from a staging yard, but Ridgeway is the main beginning of the RGS, and it eventually goes through the entire basement and ends up in Durango down in this nook here with a crew lounge. The tooth lines here are basically mountain ridges. The big gray lines are aisleways. So you actually walk through my railroad. This is the main entrance. You actually go through my version of Colorado. You cannot see all of the railroad anywhere at one time. The mountains basically go to the ceiling. The scenery goes to the ceiling. When I began, I knew I couldn't build this railroad overnight. That's another thing too, is I've always thought to myself, why build a railroad that you can finish in a lifetime? I mean, what's the point? You're just going to tear it down and build another one, probably. So this one I never expect to be done with. It's much too large, but it's a lot of fun building. And that's what I really do enjoy, is building the railroad. But I did start out with putting a temporary wall down the middle of the basement and started building the railroad in this part of the basement. This is the other half, and it has a large wood shop in it. I've made a partial living from the wood shop. It's been used for building the house, a lot of things. It's on its way out. I've done more than my share of building things out of wood, cabinets, furniture, anything, including the house. But as the railroad grows, the wood shop shrinks. So I'll go back to this if you haven't. Starting small was very important to Lori also. She didn't think I should take over the whole basement, so she's been trying to get me to finish this room first. She's sort of succeeded, not quite. All right. The green shaded area shows you the part of the railroad that's actually under construction or complete. So it's spreading. It started in this half of the basement. It's spread into this area, and now it's going down the walls. The wood shop you're going to see is still in this area. It's sharing space with the railroad, but maybe 50% or a little more of the layout is finished or under construction. Let's start out with a few slides here of the track plan. Again, Ridgeway is in the corner. There's a drop-down bridge here that brings in a hidden staging yard for Montrose. This is an interesting area in the layout. This is all underneath Trout Lake, and you can go in here and sit down and work on staging trains or whatever you want to do. It's also a reversing loop, and it does come back into Ridgeway. But this is the very, very lowest, what I call the basement level. Totally hidden except from inside. Actually, if you sit inside and look around you, there's a lot more railroad than even what you're seeing here that surrounds you. It's kind of a neat, interesting place to go. This is the track plan. Not complete in full detail. Ridgeway yards, the engine facility. This is the drop-down bridge that comes in from basically Montrose, the DNRGW. There's a Y at this end, runs down to Ridgeway, and actually the DNRGW continues around to the town of Uray, which is on the lower level in this little nook. But Trout Lake is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. We have Ridgeway, you head up to, by the main line, up to Dallas Divide, down to Placerville. We'll take a ride on that tonight. Eventually you'll head to Vance Junction, around the Overloop, and up to the very highest level. At the other end of the railroad, Durango, the RGS comes in this way into Durango. You can also continue on to Silverton. And this part of Silverton is complete all the way through here. Silverton is opposite of Ridgeway. You'll see pictures of that. So there's, nearly every town on the RGS is located on this railroad. Whether they get built, they probably will, but maybe not in the detail I want them, but there's a lot to it. This is a quick drawing of where the furnace is at, and it's a blow up of this area here where you come around and Uray is on the lower level. Okay, the upper level, here's the Overloop. It goes on up, climbing to Trout Lake, up to Lizard Head, and we go through kind of a hokey arrangement here, a John Armstrong-ish kind of thing, where you actually have a tunnel that goes through the furnace and crosses over to the Gallagher Trestles, down to Rico, swings around to Dolores, and there's a branch from Dolores running up to the logging town in McPhee. The line from Rico to Dolores is beneath this and hidden. So we have Dolores, we have the branch line to McPhee. In Durango, if I live to be 110, I can actually put in the Enterprise branch that left Rico. This was a branch that ran Shays and tied in with the RGS at Rico. I model roughly 1939. I try for the fall of 39, but I'm very flexible on that. I bring that up because the Enterprise branch was actually abandoned on the RGS or tore out in 1916. So, but it's cool to have Shays on your layout if you can fit them in. This is an interesting slide. I never did this until I did it for the presentation here. I tried to simulate the grades on my railroad to those of the Rio Grande Southern. The green line is actually the prototype, and here are the towns. They're not spaced as they're spaced in order, but not to scale. This is actually to scale. The elevation changes here. The Real Railroad started at 7,000 feet, climbed up to Dallas Divide, dropped down to Placerville, had the Telluride branch, climbed up to Lizard Head, and then dropped down all the way to Durango at about the same elevation it started at. That's the real true life thing. This is my model. And it's tough to get the grades right, but you can see my model actually, this is to scale vertically again, climbs, drops, goes up, climbs up to the peak at Lizard Head and drops all the way back down to Durango. I thought that was kind of cool when I actually drew it up to scale. Like I say, it took about a year to get the track plan formalized and with the grades that worked, and they worked out so well, they came out this close. I can say close. Now, just to give you an idea or give you a little more respect for the Rio Grande Southern, those guys, they actually started in Ridgeway and they climbed to the top of Lizard Head. The climb was 3,250 vertical feet to get from here to here. In S scale, if you did that in S scale, which I'd have to have a 51-foot change in elevation, almost a 6-story building if I wanted to do it prototypically. Well, I didn't have a 6-story building. The house is big, but not that big. In S scale, I have 30 inches roughly from my lowest point to my highest point, which only represents a climb of about 160 feet in real life. So that isn't even close, but it gives me a lot of respect for the engineers that designed the railroad that could climb that far through that kind of terrain. All right, just some basics out of the way. Approximately 800 feet of main line on the layout. Elevation change, the main lower level is at 40 inches and goes to 70. The basement level is a little bit lower than this, 37, but this is basically the part of the road you see. Grades do go up to 4%. I try to keep them down to 2 to 2.5%. Sometimes they go to 4. 28-inch minimum radius, I think I run K27s, the largest engine I run, and they have no problems with it. The only place it doesn't look good is if you've got a flat 90-degree corner somewhere you're going around on a 28-inch radius. That just it looks too hokey. But when you're winding up a grade and going around S curves, which I use a lot of, it looks fantastic. You'll see pictures of it. Flex track is used everywhere I can. I started handling the track. I could lay about 4 feet a night. I was in the Ridgeway yards, and it took me about 2 months to realize I'm never going to finish this if I don't do something different. I did try a KD spiker. I had problems with that, with it denting the rails. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get it to work right. That's when I went to flex track, and I swear by it now. My switches are all built in place. I built about 100 and some switches, and then I finally started using the fast track, not jigs, but they're filing jigs, I guess, so you can get your points and your frog filed easier. I don't use their straight templates for putting the rails together. My lighting, I use 3000K lighting. It's more like, a lot of people like real daylight on their layout, and I can understand that, but I just like the warm feeling of the more yellow light, I guess. It's what I grew up with. It's what I'm used to seeing indoors. It just gives me a warmer feeling, and my basement's pretty cold, so the warmth is nice to feel, even if it's not real. I do use DCC wireless NCE throttles. I started out with block control, of course, because I started building this way back when. And I waited until the sound systems got up to what I thought they were worth, or they should be. I started with a PBL sound system. And then finally, when the tsunamis came along and soundtracks, I switched over to DCC. You give up a little bit when you do that, but what you gain is well worth it. My rolling stock is weighted to NMRA standards. Boxcars weigh in at 4 ounces each. I just think it improves the running characteristics of the train so much more and makes everything more realistic to weight your rolling stock. You're not going to pull a 20-car freight uphill with a little C-17. You're going to have to double head your engines. 8-car trains are the norm. Okay, let's get off the drawings and the numbers. Let's take some trips. Because the railroad is being built in pieces, it's actually 3 separate railroads, 3 separate sections, and they tend to sometimes interconnect, sometimes they don't, depending on where I'm at in my construction. But right now, we're going to go from Ridgeway to Placerville. That's the longest run. That's the newest run. That just started in February of this year. Then we'll go from Rico to Dolores and McPhee, and we'll take a quick run around Trout Lake and over to Gallagher 57A, the trestle. Starting in Ridgeway, beautiful backdrops, first thing you're going to see. Thank Dale Kreutzer for that. He does beautiful backdrops, and he's done several for me. I'm glad he's there because I tried to paint that backdrop probably 6 times. It just ended up giving up. But there's a long ways to go with Ridgeway. The depot's there and the yard is there, and the rest, these are just mock-up buildings that will eventually be there, and if I live long enough. This is the other end of the Ridgeway yard. When you leave the depot, you come around and you'll turn off and go off to Durango. This is the drop down bridge. This will eventually be replaced with a through truss steel bridge coming in from Montrose, bringing the freights in and passenger trains and whatnot. We'll eventually end up going up over this bridge. That'll be coming up next. Let's see. I try to curtain below all of my fascia, which is masonite fascia. There's a ton of storage underneath here, and you almost need a map to know where you have put things, but it's a very useful thing to keep that hidden and yet available. Took a lot of help. Here's Jim McHenry. If he's still awake, he should be regretting this picture, but he was planting some sagebrush and things just around the corner of the Y. I had a lot of help on this layout. We'll see a few of the pictures of these guys. This is the upper level, so there's never a whole lot of room when you're working on the back of a scene. Okay, we head up the valley as we've left Ridgeway, coming around the corner. It's a very barren kind of valley unless you're irrigating it. So I tried to kind of simulate that in the first short run of the railroad. And we leave Pleasant Valley, cross a bridge, go under this high bridge. This is a fictitious bridge on the RGS, but it's one that's needed and it made the scene. And then you go into a tunnel and you're hidden. That was the last backdrop I painted many years ago. And I finally gave up after that. When you come out of that tunnel, you're at the other end of the railroad. You're crossing the Los Animas River, actually. The Rio Grande Southern has wooden bridges on it. The DNRGW, this is the line that comes up from Durango going to Silverton. The DNRG has steel bridges wherever possible. This is another RGS bridge above here. This is a popular place in the layout. It's one of the first things you see when you walk in the door. This little thing here is actually the door frame. You're coming into the room there, and you look down and you'll see this. The train winds around this ledge. The only way I could get it visible is if it was above the town of Silverton. This has a long ways to go. We'll talk about that later. But again, you get to at least watch the train wind itself around here. And it's leaving that area now. This is the town of Silverton in the background. It's a nice cut. It's right by the end of the railroad. It's a great place to take pictures anyway. Okay, we've traveled a little further on the main line, heading up to Dallas Divide. This is the old shortcut. This was used for probably 20 years. This is a brand new piece of track through here that I just added a month ago or so, just completed this. And it allows me now to go up to Dallas Divide. This here, if I had left it in place, it went straight and connected, and I would go directly to Dolores. And that was my run for many, many years. I could go from Ridgeway to Dolores up to McPhee, and that was it. But now that you'll see another more bench work added, Here, this is something we started about Christmas of this year. Chick Sweeney came out and I said, Chick, if we tear this out and move the freezer and take all this furniture out of this place, I can put some more bench work in here. This is the temporary wall. The shop is on the other side of this. But if I do that, I could actually extend all of these lines now. They all dead-ended here. And this is our train going up the Dallas Divide. This is actually the line coming down from Dolores heading towards Durango. It's a future thing again. And this is the first part of the High Line. Ophir is actually, or will be, right off the edge of the screen here. And this climbs up the High Line. It's a short High Line. It's not anywhere near as long as it should be, but it's long enough. And it's going up the Trout Lake, which is behind this fascia. This kind of shows you how the railroad is also constructed. L-girder framework, some, well, they're not rafters, they're joists running across, risers, plywood, homosode. It works for me. There's so much debate on how to build a railroad. This has worked for me, and it's worked for me for 30 or 40 years. I like it. Almost all of this railroad is built from scrap material, I gotta say too. And all the projects I've had, construction projects, I've had scrap left over. All the homosode. When I first built the house, I put homosode in every room as carpet board. And of course, Lori doesn't like carpet, so now I replaced all those floors and I've saved all the homosode. So I've got a house full of homosode sitting in my shop waiting to be used on my railroad. Okay. This is the trestle here that goes, what I call the furnace trestle, because this goes into a tunnel and the furnace is in this little room back here. The train's moving on up now, going up to Dallas Divide. Almost reached its first main climb here. And we're pulling in the Dallas Divide. These are all structures that John Schlabowski built for me. Scratched the barn, he scratched the ranch hand's house, Banta kits. John does a lot of building for me. Again, a beautiful backdrop that Dale Kreutzer made of Dallas Divide. Just another shot of the same. The stock pens at Dallas Divide, again, a long ways to go with clutter and detail. It's nice. I was amazed how easy it was to blend in Dale's backdrop to the foreground scenery. And another view of it. John's house, the rancher's house up there. It's coming along. This is a train coming in from Placerville. The Y actually goes back here. You see the end of the Y here up at Dallas Divide. And then we leave Dallas Divide, we go down, drop down to Placerville, which is, this is where we're encroaching into the shop. You see a lot of the shop tools kind of shoved out of the way, pushed out of the way. Unless they're needed, then they have to be brought out. We'll be on this trestle later on. This is built by John Kalin. This is the Gallagher trestle, 57A, full size built. It's a beautiful piece, but we'll have a little more on that in a minute. You notice here, this is the upper level, and this is the lower level. And well, I had a, sorry guys. Yeah, I actually have a shot, maybe it's further on in the presentation, that you only have about 9 inches between here and here, but that's sufficient if you're ever considering how close can you go with different levels on your layout. This is about 9.5 inches. That's about as low as I would go, as long as you don't have to go back very far. All right, this is the Mixmaster Disaster. Don Warziniak's my mix master when it comes to plaster. And Bill Scobie back here is another helper that the three of us can do a lot of plastering in an evening, unless the table collapses when Don's mixing the plaster. And that's what you see all over the wall. It's on the lamp. It's all over everywhere. It's wet, sticky plaster when his table collapsed underneath him. And it was even in Don's hair. And pretty much everywhere else on Don. So it's work, but it's fun too, guys. Okay, another quick trip. Rico to Dolores. This has got some nicer scenery on it. Again, this is leaving a tunnel coming from Rico, going up along the Dolores River here. This is the line to McPhee, the branch line. And down in the corner, you can actually see the lower level, which is the line from Ridgeway going up to Dallas Divide. Another seldom seen scene on the layout. This is my one and only attempt at a waterfall. I put it way back in the corner, back where people can't see it. It almost looks like water, but it looks more like, well, I don't know. But again, train follows the Dolores River, goes over the high bridge, headed for Dolores, arrives in Dolores. Conoco plant just got put in a couple of months ago. Even though I've had the model for many, many years, it never got installed in the layout. Montezuma Fruit Company is another business in Dolores. This is the other end of the Conoco plant in Dolores. A lot of this was actually detailed by Art Fahey many years ago, of Bar Mills fame. Art came in and got me inspired as to how to clutter up and junk up a scene. And an unfinished or uninstalled Dolores Depot. That's why you've seen probably so many different RGS depots, is because I needed them on my layout, and that's what got everything rolling. Another backdrop by Dale of Dolores, Colorado. And something else I installed since last fall was the section foreman's house. This is the one, if you've been to the narrow gauge conventions years ago, we would take this along, and it was the show model actually. Now it's setting on the layout. J.J. Harris warehouse in the back. That was one of our later or last models we produced. You can take the branch line out of Dolores and you end up at the logging town, lumber town of McPhee. And most of these are kit buildings that, again, John Schlabowski built. This one here, actually, Pete Smith built for me. It's one of his old kits, his branch line station. This is definitely a logging town. This is one that I came up with, a structure, Morte's Mortuary. Complete with coffins, and Chick Sweeney did the truck, so we have a truck hauling coffins around. It's one of the more fun little towns on the layout. Just to the left is there's a sawmill. It's got a long ways to go. We leave Dolores by going over that high bridge you saw. This is the bridge of the DNRGW going from Durango up to Silverton. That little corner there, we've been over that one, but that's immaterial. It's one of the first things you see when you enter the layout room is this a series of 3 bridges here over the Los Animas River. The river is really starting to drop now and pick up speed and velocity as it goes down the canyon, and it'll go all the way down almost to Durango. Trout Lake to Gallagher. Right now, we have, this line extends a little bit further this way, but basically comes around. This is the Trout Lake. We were looking at it from this end before. Now we're looking from the opposite end of the lake. Let's see what we got here. This is the dam keeper's house. This is the control works. Trout Lake is actually a reservoir. It's not a lake. There's a dam there, and it's actually the third reservoir in a row. And at one time, actually, the dams broke and flooded all the way down to Placerville. True history, but it is a dam. It was controlled, or the level was controlled by this structure here, the outlet works. I believe this is 51A is the bridge, the trestle up at this end. Here's a view from the opposite side of the lake being constructed. It shows you the framework, some of the hoops you jump through trying to get something built that you've seen in your mind. Sometimes you're half crazy and shouldn't start it. This is actually the main line going from Ridgeway on up the Dallas Divide. This is the hidden staging area. There's all kinds of things going on here, but it just gives you an idea that the lake is quite sturdy. Everything on the layout is built sturdy. Chick here, Sweeney, is laying on the lake. This is when he was younger. He definitely doesn't look anywhere near that fit anymore. But this is the base of the lake. There is a hatch now here, so you can get to it. Just another good time. This is the train coming around the corner, just coming up from Ophir. The outlet works again. Nice solid rock wall here. But, tank at Trout Lake is used. This is 51A. I couldn't do the full size trestle here because right below here is a track. You couldn't go low enough. 51A is like 2 stories high. But it's there, it represents it. It's also the water flowing into the lake. And we go climb up the other side of the lake and exit, heading up to Lizard Head. I did try to locate basically viewing points. This is up high, it's near the ceiling of the room. And to get pictures of it, I actually have shaped the scenery so you can see things like this or take pictures from different locations. The beaver ponds, that was built probably back in the early 90s. And the beavers are still there. Arriving Lizard Head Pass. This is kind of why I quit painting backdrops. Looks pretty good down here, that's all painted, but the mountains are hurting. But they're high enough up, I try to distract you with the train. Stock pins at Lizard Head. Leaving Lizard Head. Down below, you can see the engine house at Ridgeway. Again, going over the furnace trestle into the furnace tunnel. This is the line coming up, going to Dallas Divide. This is the shop end of the furnace trestle or furnace tunnel. This is what you'd call a duck under. There's 3 duck unders on the layout. This is the highest one. It's a little over 6 feet. This shows you a lot of my construction also when I get to things like this, because there's a level or a layer lower than this with more railroad, actually the line to Placerville. You don't want a lot of framework down there. So it's cantilevered off the wall. The studs, they're bolted to, and then plywood cantilevers out to hold the roadbed, the homicide. And 57A. That's where we stop right now. I can't go on until I get more of the wood shop moved out. Again, trying to visualize this when I was going to put the trestle in is, well, how do you mount it? You know, it's kind of like mounted in midair sort of. And so you do whatever you can to get it in there. There's the slide I was looking for. This is Placerville. This is the base of 57A, 9.5 inches from here, clearance. I'll put a fascia piece across here, which will drop down another 1/4 to 1/2 inch to hide the plywood. And there's plenty of room here for stock pins and whatnot. So you don't need a whole lot of room between levels. Okay, just a quick gallery. So I'll go call it a night. This is a replacement depot that John Schlabowski built for me. The very first one I built was the wrong size, and that's actually the one that got turned into a kit by Bill. We both didn't realize it was a bit too long, so John went ahead and built me one the right length. Beautiful interior in it. And this is the Three Bridges scene that you'd see from the door when you enter the railroad. Again, the Los Animas River flowing back on up. This line from Durango goes under these bridges, ends up circling around, heading up to Silverton. This is McPhee up here. This is actually well, to be honest with you, this is the test build for the Idaho Hotel in O-scale that I did for Bar Mills many years ago, but it's about the right size for a lumber mill there. So it's been sitting there as a mock lumber mill, at least telling me how big the building's supposed to be. Across the aisle is Dolores with the Dolores Conoco plant. My aisles are narrow. I don't have visitors. That's somewhat intentional. I also live very remotely. The widest aisle in the layout is only 36 inches. 2 foot, 26 inches, something like that is more normal for me. I'm not a big person and I'm not tall, so I don't mind the duck unders. So I do violate a lot of the rules that they tell you you're supposed to follow. But if you have a big crowd, I can see why you'd have them. Wider aisles. Another view of the railroad. These are the Three Bridges. This is the line coming into Silverton from Durango. Muddy Los Animas River. I've seen it that way more often than I've seen it clear. This is the beginning of the smelter. You guys are familiar with the smelter kit we used to produce. Again, it was, I had to put one set of bins here, and as you know, it comes with 2 sets of bins. There's another one back behind the building. This is the smelter, the kit. Somebody in HO said they counted over 3,000 pieces in this kit. So it was a big job for anybody putting it together. Just an overall view of Silverton. None of these buildings are permanent other than the Silverton Depot and the Silverton Northern Depot. The Silverton Northern Depot is kind of an afterthought that was included in the design, and that I could put it here. I could simulate it going up the Animas Forks here, but it really goes into a tunnel and into a helix and ends up coming back out in this area by Ridgeway. What that did for me is allow me to run from Ridgeway over the entire RGS all the way to Durango, but continue on up to Silverton, go to the helix and come back. So it allows for continuous running. The helix is only 1.5 loops. It's not a whole 2 or 3, 4 or 5 loops, nothing like that. It's a very short run, but it does give me the option of continuous running when the railroad gets complete. The traffic jam here is caused by John Schlabowski. He loves vehicles, and he really likes to see them on my layout, so I enjoy them. Thank you, John. Some of these buildings, there's Monkey Myth. This one's by John Addison. I do have a lot of people that have contributed some marvelous structures to the layout. Just a shot of the engine house at Ridgeway. This is a Los Animas house that, again, John built, Schlabowski. Really fits in well there. Backdrop by Dale again. There's John's house. Lori thought it was a good touch to have a reunion of a couple long separated. I like the backdrop in that. It's pretty cool. And it's not all fun and games. This is my buddy Chick. Twice now we've had to go through and replace wooden blocks that were holding up this beam with steel plates so that I could sheetrock a lot easier. So we had to jack the house up, preferably when our wives were out shopping. It was the easiest time. But we did it, and the house is still there, and everything's standing fine. A lot of help, guys. These are my main guys that show up to help or contribute. Don Wozniak, Bill Scobie, Chick Sweeney, John Schlabowski. But there's a lot of others. It almost reads like a who's who in model railroading when you see all these names and how many people have contributed in one way or another. Thank you. And of course, without PBL, I wouldn't have Sn3. So we wouldn't have Sn3. So thank you. Even Paul Scholes' names there. See that? Jim Vale, there's a structure by him on here. HO. That's the mine at the end of Trout Lake. And again, thank you to Lori. She's had a lot of patience, understanding, and she definitely encourages me to go down to the basement, leave her alone. If you want to follow the progress, we still have the link to it on our webpage, ragstoriches.com or .biz or whatever . But they all get you there. And then you got to click on the Raggs Sn3 Rio Grande Southern. Hopefully now that I'm closed and hopefully more retired. But I think it was said already tonight that you're busier after you retire than ever before. And that's very true. But I'll be able to update it a little more often. So there's a lot more photos and a few more stories there if you'd like to see them. That's it, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. That was a wonderful presentation. You have a terrific layout. And for everybody else, I had the good fortune of visiting Joe's layout about 3 or 4 years ago. And it is really magnificent. Let's go to the chat room. We have a couple of comments here. Daryl Jacobs, also an engineer, said only an engineer would put a railroad through a furnace. Pete Sellinger mentioned that the transition between the layout and the backdrop is particularly well done. It goes with the excellent modeling overall. And Bill Hobbs, I envy your energy levels. I cannot imagine undertaking a project of this size. Alan Pollock says, do you have a structure by Tom Trofton on the layout? And I think the answer is yes.
Yes, absolutely, yes. It's in Silverton.
Yep. And John Sauer, wonderful layout. Thanks for sharing. Jim Spice, great layout.